I'm Alicia Foster, 19, and last week my role as the family's quiet fixer? Yeah, it completely backfired. The trust I'd poured my heart into earning, the late nights mediating fights, covering for Jesse's messes, it all exploded into a betrayal so raw it still stings, right here in our cramped Denver apartment at what was supposed to be a routine family night. Jessie, my sister, with that smug glint in her eye, demanded I take the fall for something I didn't do. When I pushed back, her voice sliced through the room. "You're nothing but a liability." The air froze, Mom and Dad's eyes darting to the floor, my little brother's fork clattering against his plate. But here's the truth. Their betrayal didn't break me, it woke me up. I'm not just fighting back, I'm rewriting my entire story. A quick note, this story is copyrighted by the YouTube channel Guest Stories. Reposting, revoicing, or editing this content without permission constitutes copyright infringement. Thank you for respecting original creative work. Now, back to the story. It started with a text from Mom. "Family dinner, 7 p.m., don't be late." I'd been dreading it all week, my stomach nodding as I parked outside our beige brick apartment complex. I'm the odd one out, always have been. While Jessie, 22, was their golden child, cheerleader, prom queen, destined for greatness, I was the quiet one, sketching in notebooks, training my rescue dog Max, and dreaming of a life beyond their expectations. They never saw me, not really. I'd spent years gluing our family together, smoothing over Dad's temper, Mom's passive-aggressive sighs, Jessie's tantrums. I thought it was love. I thought it was loyalty. But that night, as I stepped through the door, Max's leash still in my hand, I felt the weight of something darker. Jessie's smirk as she leaned against the counter, Mom's fidgeting with her earrings, Dad's refusal to meet my eyes. It was like they were all in on a secret I hadn't been told. I sat at the table, the smell of Mom's overcooked lasagna filling the room. My little brother, Tim, 14, was the only one who seemed normal, sneaking Max a piece of garlic bread under the table. I tried to focus on him, on the way his sneakers tapped nervously against the chair leg, but Jessie's voice kept cutting through. "So Alicia, still playing with your little art projects?" she said, her tone dripping with mockery. I clenched my fork, my knuckles whitening. I wanted to snap back, to tell her about the graphic design gig I'd landed, the one she'd never understand. But I didn't. I never did. I thought keeping the peace was my job. That was my first mistake. The dinner dragged on, their voices a blur of veiled insults and fake smiles. I kept glancing at Max, curled up in the corner, his brown eyes watching me like he knew something was wrong. I'd set up a hidden camera in my room a month ago just to check on him when I was at work. He'd been chewing my shoes, and I thought it was cute to catch him in the act. Never did I imagine that camera would become my lifeline. As the plates were cleared, Jessie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at Dad, who nodded slightly. My heart sank. Something was coming, and I wasn't ready. The clatter of dishes in the sink faded as I sat on the couch, Max's head resting on my knee. My mind drifted to the past, to all the times I'd been invisible in this family. Growing up, I was always the shadow to Jessie's spotlight. I remember being 12, bursting with pride when my sketch won first place at the school art fair. I'd rushed home, clutching the blue ribbon, thinking Mom and Dad would finally see me. But when I showed them, Mom barely glanced up from her phone, muttering, "That's nice, Alicia." Dad was worse. He was too busy cheering Jessie's volleyball team stats from her latest game. "MVP again," he'd boomed, his voice filling the house while my ribbon sat forgotten on the counter. I tucked it into my drawer, next to the others they never noticed. It wasn't just that day. At 15, I spent months teaching myself digital design, staying up late with tutorials, my eyes burning from the screen's glow. I created a logo for a local pet store, my first paid gig. I told Mom at dinner, my voice shaking with excitement. She nodded absently, then turned to Jessie, gushing about her acceptance to some fancy summer camp. "You're going places, Jess," she said, her smile wide. I stared at my plate, my fork scraping against the ceramic plate, the sound louder in my head than their chatter. Tim was the only one who asked to see the logo later, his eyes wide as he said, "This is so cool, Alicia." But even he couldn't fill the hole their indifference left. Jessie's successes were always the main event. Her cheer routines, her straight-A report cards, her prom queen crown. They hung her trophies on the living room wall, a shrine to her perfection. My sketches, my designs, my quiet victories, they were hobbies. Not worth mentioning. I remember one Christmas, I made custom cards for everyone, spent weeks on the details. Dad tossed his aside to open Jessie's gift, a framed photo of her in her cheer uniform. "Now that's something special," he said, holding it up like a trophy. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. It wasn't just about praise, it was the way they rewrote me, like I was a background character in their story. At family gatherings, aunts and uncles would ask Jessie about her plans, her future. If I spoke up, Mom would cut in, steering the conversation back to Jessie. "Alicia's just figuring things out," she'd say, her voice tight like my existence was an inconvenience. I'd sit there, my hands twisting in my lap, feeling smaller with every word. I started to believe maybe I was less important, less talented, less worthy. But deep down I knew better. I kept designing, kept creating, pouring my heart into my work because it was mine. It was the one place I wasn't invisible. By 19, I'd built a small portfolio, landed freelance gigs, even started dreaming of my own studio someday. I didn't need their validation, I thought. But that dinner, with Jessie's smirks and Mom's averted eyes, brought it all back. The years of being unseen, of being less. As I stroked Max's fur, his warmth grounding me, I felt the old ache resurface. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the last time I'd let them define me. The next hours would shatter everything I thought I knew about family. Max's soft whine pulled me back to the moment, his nose nudging my hand as I sat on my bed, the dinner's tension still buzzing in my chest. I glanced at the tiny camera tucked on my bookshelf, its red light blinking faintly. A month ago I'd bought it on a whim, a cheap pet cam to catch Max's antics while I was at work. He'd been sneaking onto my bed, leaving muddy paw prints on my comforter, and I thought it'd be funny to see him in action. Setting it up was a small victory. Plugging it in, syncing it to my phone, hiding it behind a stack of sketchbooks so it blended in. I didn't know then that this little device, bought for $29.90 at a pet store, would become my salvation. It was a Friday night, a few weeks before that awful dinner. I'd come home exhausted from a double shift at the coffee shop, my fingers still smudged with charcoal from sketching on my break. Max greeted me with his usual tail-wagging frenzy, but I noticed my room looked off. My desk drawer was slightly open, a notebook misplaced. I brushed it off. Maybe Tim had been snooping for snacks again, but it nagged at me. That's when I decided to set up the camera. I spent an hour fiddling with the app, cursing under my breath as it kept disconnecting. Max tilted his head watching me struggle, his ears flopping like he was judging my tech skills. When it finally worked, I laughed, filming a test clip of him chewing his squeaky toy. "You're a star, buddy," I said, scratching his chin. The camera became my little obsession. I'd check the footage after work, smiling at Max napping or chasing his tail. But that night, as I replayed the day's clips to distract myself from the dinner's bad vibes, something caught my eye. A shadow moved across the frame. Not Max, but a person. My heart skipped. I rewound, my thumb trembling on the screen. There was Jessie slipping into my room that afternoon while I was out. She moved fast, her hands darting to my dresser, pulling out a small plastic bag from her pocket. My breath caught as she tucked it under my mattress, glancing over her shoulder like she knew she was doing something wrong. The timestamp showed 2:17 p.m., hours before the dinner. I played it again, my pulse hammering in my ears. The bag? Small, clear, filled with white powder. My mind raced. Jessie had been in my room, planting something. Drugs? It didn't make sense, but the footage didn't lie. My hands shook as I saved the clip, my stomach twisting with a mix of fear and fury. Why would she do this? I thought of her smirk at dinner, Mom's fidgeting, Dad's silence. Were they all in on it? I wanted to storm out and confront them, but my legs felt like lead. Max whimpered, sensing my panic, and I pulled him close, his warmth steadying me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept watching the clip, each frame burning the truth deeper into me. This wasn't just Jessie being her usual cruel self. This was calculated, vicious. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew one thing. That camera, meant to catch Max's silly moments, had caught something far bigger. It was my proof, my way out. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I gripped my phone, the weight of what I'd discovered sinking in. The next evening, I stood outside our apartment, Max's leash looped around my wrist, my stomach churning like I was walking into a trap. It was the night of the big family dinner, the one Mom had been hyping up for weeks, claiming it was time to reconnect. I'd spent the day replaying Jessie's footage in my head. The image of her planting that bag under my mattress seared into me. I hadn't confronted her yet. Part of me didn't want to believe it, didn't want to face what it meant. Max tugged at the leash, his tail wagging, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I took a deep breath, the cold Denver air biting my lungs, and pushed open the door. The apartment smelled of garlic and tension. Mom was fussing over a pot of spaghetti, her hands fluttering like she was nervous. Dad sat at the table scrolling on his phone, his jaw tight. Jessie was there, leaning against the counter, her arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Tim was the only one who seemed happy to see me, his face lighting up as he knelt to pet Max. "Hey, buddy," he said, ruffling Max's fur. I forced a smile, my heart pounding as I scanned the room for clues. What were they planning? The bag, Jessie's glance at Dad during the last dinner. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't solved yet. I set the table, my hands moving on autopilot, arranging forks and napkins while my mind raced. I kept my phone in my pocket, the saved footage like a loaded gun. Should I say something now? Call Jessie out in front of everyone? But what if I was wrong? What if it wasn't drugs, just some stupid prank? I glanced at her, catching her eyes for a split second before she looked away, her fingers tapping the counter. She was too calm, too controlled. It made my skin crawl. Mom called us to the table, her voice overly cheery. "Let's make this a good night, okay?" she said, passing the spaghetti. I nodded, my throat tight, as I took my seat next to Tim. He nudged me under the table, whispering, "You okay?" I gave him a small nod, but my eyes kept darting to Jessie. She was watching me, her expression unreadable, like she was waiting for something. Dad cleared his throat, starting some bland small talk about his job, but his voice sounded strained, like he was reading a script. I poked at my food, each bite tasting like cardboard, my nerves screaming that something was coming. As dessert was served, store-bought pie, Mom's usual shortcut, I noticed Jessie check her phone again. She typed something, her thumbs moving fast, then slipped it back into her pocket. My pulse spiked. Was that the signal? I gripped my glass, the condensation slick under my fingers, and glanced at Max, curled up in the corner. He was my anchor, the one thing in this room that felt safe. I didn't know it then, but in a few hours everything would unravel. The dinner, the family, the lies. It was all building to a moment that would break me open and set me free. As Mom started clearing plates, I heard a faint siren in the distance, growing louder. My heart stopped. They were here. The siren's wail grew louder, slicing through the hum of the dinner table, as I sat frozen, my fork hovering over a half-eaten slice of pie. Mom's hands paused mid-plate stack, her eyes flicking to Dad, who shifted in his chair, his knuckles whitening around his glass. Jessie leaned back, her arms crossed, that same smirk curling her lips like she was savoring a private joke. Tim looked at me, his brows knitting together, but I couldn't meet his gaze. My pulse hammered in my throat, the sound of the siren now unmistakable, closing in on our street. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but the footage of Jessie in my room burned in my mind. This was no accident. The doorbell rang, sharp and jarring. Mom flinched, her plate clattering against the table. "I'll get it," she said, her voice too high, her hands smoothing her apron as she hurried to the door. I heard muffled voices, then heavy footsteps. 2 police officers stepped into the dining room, their badges glinting under the fluorescent light. My stomach dropped. "Alicia Foster?" the taller one said, his voice clipped. I nodded, my mouth dry, my fingers curling into my palms. Jessie's smirk widened just for a second, before she masked it with a look of fake concern. "We received a tip about illegal substances in your possession," the officer continued, his partner scanning the room. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest, but it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced the gesture. Dad stared at the table, his jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Tim's eyes widened, his voice barely a whisper. "Alicia, what's going on?" I wanted to answer, but my throat felt sealed shut. The officers asked to search my room, and Mom nodded quickly, too quickly, leading them down the hall. Jessie followed, her steps light, almost eager. I trailed behind, my legs heavy, Max trotting at my side, his leash dragging on the floor. In my room, the officers moved with precision, flipping through drawers, lifting my mattress. My heart stopped as the second officer pulled out the plastic bag Jesse had planted, the white powder glaring under the light. "This yours?" he asked, holding it up. I shook my head, my voice barely audible. "No, I swear." Jessie piped up, her tone dripping with fake shock. "Alicia, how could you?" Mom's hand gripped Dad's arm, her eyes wide, but there was no warmth in them, no defense. They believed her. They all did. The officers read me my rights, their words blurring into a haze as cold metal clicked around my wrists. I looked at Tim, his face pale, his hands twisting in his lap. "I didn't do this," I whispered, but he just stared, confused, betrayed. Jessie stood by the door, her arms crossed, her eyes gleaming with triumph. As they led me out, Max barked, lunging after me, but Dad grabbed his collar, holding him back. The last thing I saw was Jessie's smirk, sharp as a blade, as the door slammed shut behind me. The weight of their betrayal crushed me. But deep down, a spark of defiance flickered. I had the footage. I had the truth. The police car's back seat smelled of stale coffee and leather, the cuffs biting into my wrists as I stared out the window. The apartment building shrinking in the distance. My chest ached like it was caving in. Jessie's smirk and Mom's fake gasp were playing in my head like a looped video. They'd set me up. Jessie, Mom, Dad, all of them. The bag of drugs, the tip to the police, the way they'd looked at me like I was a stranger. It was a plan, cold and deliberate. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, my breath fogging it up, trying to hold back the tears burning my eyes. I wasn't a criminal, but they'd made me one in their story. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they booked me, my fingers trembling as they pressed them into ink for prints. The officers' questions were a blur. Name, date of birth, do you understand the charges? I nodded mechanically, my voice gone. All I could think about was Max, alone in that apartment, and the camera, its red light blinking in my room. It held the truth, but I was here, locked in a holding cell, the metal bench cold against my back. The other women in the cell kept their distance, their murmurs fading into the background as I curled my knees to my chest, replaying every moment of that dinner. Jessie's quick glance at her phone, Dad's silence, Mom's overdone shock. They'd orchestrated this, and I'd walked right into it. Hours dragged by, the cell's silence broken only by the clang of doors and distant voices. I kept picturing Tim's face, the confusion in his eyes. Did he know? He was only 14, he knew, too young to be in on it, but he hadn't spoken up either. The betrayal cut deeper than the cuffs. My family, the people I'd spent years trying to please, had turned on me without a second thought. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, the pain grounding me. I wasn't going to break here. I had to get out, get to my phone, get to that footage. A guard's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Foster, you've got a visitor." My heart leapt. Maybe Tim, maybe someone who believed me. But when they led me to the visitation room, it was my grandfather, Pop, his weathered hands gripping his cane, his eyes fierce under his baseball cap. "Alicia, what the hell's going on?" he said, his voice low but sharp. I sank into the chair, the words spilling out. Jesse's setup, the drugs, the camera. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the cane. "I knew that girl was trouble," he muttered. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "I'm getting you a lawyer, you're not staying here." Pop's promise was a lifeline, but as they led me back to the cell, the weight of the night crashed down again. My family had tried to erase me, to rewrite my life as a criminal's, but they didn't know about the camera. They didn't know I had proof. As I sat on the bench, the cold seeping into my bones, I felt a spark of something new, not just fear, but anger. They'd tried to break me, but I was still here. And I was going to fight. The cell's fluorescent lights flickered as I sat on the metal bench, Pop's words echoing in my head. "You're not staying here." His promise kept me tethered, but the hours dragged, each minute heavy with the betrayal still clawing at my chest. My phone, with the footage of Jesse planting the drugs, was back at the apartment, probably in Mom's hands by now. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Then, a guard's boots clomped down the hall. "Foster, your lawyer's here," he grunted, unlocking the door. My heart surged. Pop had moved fast. The lawyer, a wiry woman named Miss Carter with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense braid, sat across from me in a cramped meeting room. She didn't waste time. "Your grandfather told me about the camera," she said, her pen tapping her notepad. If that footage is what you say, it's your ticket out. I explained everything. Jesse's smirk, the bag under my mattress, the time-stamped clip I'd saved. Miss Carter nodded, scribbling notes, her face unreadable but focused. I need that footage, she said. Do you trust anyone to get your phone? I hesitated. Tim's confused face flashed in my mind, but I couldn't be sure he wasn't part of their plan. Pop, I said finally. Only Pop. She made a call, and within an hour, Pop was at the station, my phone in his trembling hands. He'd gone to the apartment, faced Mom's protests, and grabbed it before she could argue. Miss Carter plugged it into her laptop, and there it was. Jesse, clear as day, slipping into my room, planting the bag. The timestamp matched perfectly. 2:17 p.m., hours before the police showed up. My breath caught as Miss Carter's lips twitched into a small, satisfied smile. This changes everything, she said. She took the evidence to the prosecutor, and by morning the charges were dropped. The police confirmed the footage was legit. No tampering, no doubt. Jesse's setup was exposed, and they were now looking at her for possession and false reporting. I was free, but as I walked out of the station, Pop's arm around my shoulders, the weight of what happened didn't lift. My family had planned this, all of them. Mom's fake tears, Dad's silence, Jesse's smugness. They'd wanted me gone. Pop handed me my phone, his voice gruff. You're stronger than them, kid. I nodded, but my hands shook as I clutched the phone. The footage still paused on Jesse's guilty face. Standing in the station's parking lot, the morning air sharp against my skin, I felt raw, like a wound that hadn't scabbed over. The truth had saved me, but it had also shattered the last thread of hope I had for my family. They weren't just flawed, they were toxic, willing to destroy me to protect their perfect image. Pop's truck rumbled nearby, and Max's bark echoed from the open window, his tail thumping against the seat. I climbed in, burying my face in his fur, letting his warmth steady me. The camera had given me my freedom, but now I had to figure out what to do with it. Pop's truck rumbled down the highway, Max's head resting on my lap as I stared out the window, the city lights blurring past. The footage on my phone had set me free, but the weight of my family's betrayal pressed harder than ever. I wasn't going back to that apartment. Not yet, maybe not ever. Pop glanced at me, his hands steady on the wheel, and said, "You don't owe them a damn thing." His words sparked something in me, a resolve I hadn't felt before. I needed to face them, not to beg for forgiveness, but to expose their lies and walk away for good. We pulled up to the apartment complex, the beige brick looking colder under the streetlights. Pop stayed in the truck with Max, his eyes fierce. "I'm right here if you need me," he said. I nodded, my heart pounding as I climbed the stairs, my phone gripped like a weapon. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Mom was at the kitchen counter, her hands twisting a dish towel. Dad sat on the couch, his face buried in his hands. Jessie stood by the window, her arms crossed, but her usual smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. Tim hovered near the doorway, his eyes darting between us, clutching a soda can like a lifeline. I didn't wait for them to speak. "I know what you did," I said, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. I held up my phone, the footage paused on Jesse's guilty face. "The camera caught everything. You planted those drugs, Jesse, and you." I turned to Mom and Dad, my voice rising. "You let her. You called the cops on me." Mom's mouth opened, but no words came out. Dad's shoulders slumped, his silence louder than any excuse. Jesse's eyes narrowed. "You're lying," she snapped, but her voice cracked, betraying her. I played the clip, the sound of Jesse's footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Her face paled as the footage showed her slipping the bag under my mattress. Tim gasped, his soda can slipping to the floor, fizzing across the carpet. "You did that?" he whispered, staring at Jessie. She flinched, her hands clenching into fists, but she didn't answer. I turned to Mom, her eyes brimming with tears that felt hollow. "Alicia, we didn't mean," she started, but I cut her off. "You meant to ruin me," I said, my voice sharp. "You chose her over me, and you didn't even blink." I stepped closer, my anger spilling over. "I spent years trying to make you see me, to make you proud, but you never did. You built a lie around Jesse, and when I didn't fit, you tried to erase me." Dad finally looked up, his face gray, but he said nothing. Jesse muttered, "You're overreacting," but it was weak, desperate. I shook my head. "I'm done with you. All of you." I turned to Tim, his eyes wide with shock. "You didn't know, did you?" I asked softly. He shook his head, tears welling up. I wanted to hug him, but I couldn't stay in that room another second. I walked out, the door slamming behind me, my chest heaving as I reached Pop's truck. Max licked my hand, his warmth pulling me back from the edge. I'd said my piece, exposed their hypocrisy, and left them with nothing but their guilt. For the first time, I felt the weight of their lies lift, replaced by a fragile but real sense of freedom. Pop's truck rattled along the quiet streets, the hum of the engine filling the silence as I leaned my head against the window, Max's steady breathing a comfort in my lap. The confrontation with my family left me raw, like I'd shed a skin I'd outgrown, but wasn't ready to lose. Pop didn't push me to talk, just kept driving toward his small house on the edge of town where I'd be staying. His place was a haven. Wood-paneled walls, old jazz records stacked by a creaky turntable, and a backyard where Max could run free. It was the opposite of the apartment's suffocating tension, and as we pulled into his driveway, I felt my shoulders loosen for the first time in days. Inside, Pop set a mug of chamomile tea in front of me, his calloused hands steady as he sat across the kitchen table. "You're safe here, Alicia," he said, his voice gruff but warm. I nodded, my fingers tracing the mug's handle, the steam curling up like a small promise. Max flopped at my feet, his tail thumping softly against the linoleum. Pop's house smelled of cedar and coffee, and the quiet was different, not heavy but grounding. I thought of Tim's shocked face back at the apartment, the way he'd looked at Jessie like he was seeing her for the first time. But the rest of them, Mom's crocodile tears, Dad's silence, Jessie's defiance, they were a family I didn't recognize anymore. Pop leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "You don't need them," he said. "You've got your own fire." His words hit deep, stirring something I hadn't let myself feel. Pride. Not in them, but in me. I thought of the camera, the freelance gigs I'd fought for, the sketches I'd poured my heart into. Pop saw it all, always had. When I was 10, he'd hung my first drawing, a clumsy sketch of Max's predecessor, a mutt named Rusty, in his living room, right next to his old war medals. "Better than any trophy," he'd said, winking. Now, he reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're my family, kid, the real kind." I sipped the tea, its warmth spreading through me, and glanced at Max, his eyes half closed but fixed on me like he knew I needed him. Pop's support, Max's loyalty, it was a stark contrast to the cold betrayal of the dinner. My family, the biological one, had tried to erase me, but here in this small kitchen, I felt seen. I told Pop about the footage, how it saved me, and he chuckled, shaking his head. "You and that dog camera," he said, "smartest move you ever made." I managed a small laugh, the first in days, but as we sat there, the weight of the night began to shift. Pop wasn't just a lifeline, he was proof I could build a family that didn't hurt. I thought of my clients, the barista at work who always saved me a muffin, the online art community that hyped my designs. They were my chosen family, not bound by blood, but by something stronger, trust. Pop stood, clapping my shoulder. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's a new start." I nodded, knowing he was right. This wasn't just an escape, it was a beginning. Pop's spare room smelled of fresh linen and old books, the single bed creaking as I sat on its edge, Max curled up at my feet. The quiet of his house wrapped around me like a shield, but my mind was still reeling from the confrontation. Jessie's pale face, Mom's fake tears, Dad's silence, they haunted me, but I wasn't going back. Not to them, not to that life. I pulled out my phone, the footage still saved, a reminder of the truth I'd fought for. I needed to set boundaries, to carve out a space where their toxicity couldn't reach me. That started now. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys. First, I blocked their numbers. Mom, Dad, Jessie. Each click felt like a brick in a wall I was building, one that would keep them out. Tim was the only one I hesitated over. His shocked eyes lingered in my mind, the way he dropped his soda can when the footage played. He hadn't known, I was sure of it, but he was still part of their world. I left his number unblocked but muted notifications. If he reached out, I'd decide then. For now, I needed distance. Next, I drafted an email to my landlord, my hands shaking as I typed. I wasn't going back to that apartment, not with Jessie's fingerprints all over it. Pop had already offered me his spare room for as long as I needed, and I'd take him up on it. I requested to break my lease, citing personal circumstances, and attached a note from Miss Carter about the arrest. It felt final, like cutting a tether. I hit send, my breath catching as the confirmation popped up. Max lifted his head, sensing my tension, and I scratched his ears, his warmth steadying me. I turned to my social media, my thumb scrolling through posts from family, Jesse's curated selfies, mom's Bible quotes, dad's fishing photos. I unfollowed them all, my chest tightening with each tap. This wasn't just about cutting contact, it was about reclaiming my space. I thought of Pop's words last night, "You've got your own fire." He was right. I opened my design portfolio, the one I'd built in secret, and started drafting a message to my clients. Taking on new projects. I wrote, my voice steady in the words. I wasn't just surviving, I was moving forward. By morning, I sat with Pop at his kitchen table, a plate of his slightly burnt pancakes between us. "You're doing the right thing," he said, pouring me coffee. I nodded, telling him about the lease, the blocked numbers. His eyes crinkled with pride. "You're tougher than I was at your age," he said, and I felt a spark of something new, confidence. I'd lost the family I was born into, but I was building a new one, starting with Pop and Max. My phone buzzed, a text from Tim. "I'm sorry, Alicia, I didn't know." I stared at it, my thumb hovering, but didn't reply. Not yet. I needed time, and for the first time, I was okay with putting myself first. Pop's backyard was bathed in morning light, the grass damp under my sneakers as I sat on his old porch swing. Max sprawled beside me, his tail thumping lazily. My laptop balanced on my knees, open to my design portfolio, the one I'd spent years building in the shadows of my family's indifference. The confrontation, the footage, the escape to Pop's. It had all led here, to a moment where I could finally step into my own light. I wasn't just running from their betrayal, I was redefining what the name Alicia Foster meant, not as their scapegoat, but as someone who built something real. I scrolled through my latest project, a branding package for a local dog trainer. The logo was clean, bold, a silhouette of a dog mid-leap, with sharp lines that felt alive. The client had loved it, and her email this morning offered a referral to a bigger firm. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling in my chest. This was my chance to make my work more than a side hustle, to claim a legacy that wasn't tied to Jesse's trophies or Mom's expectations. I drafted a pitch, my words careful but confident, and sent it to the firm. As the confirmation flashed, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Max nudged my hand, his nose cold against my fingers, and I smiled. He'd been my anchor through all of this, his loyalty a quiet reminder of what trust could look like. I thought of Pop inside, humming to his jazz records, and the barista at work who'd slipped me a free coffee yesterday saying, "You look like you need it." These were my people now, not the family who'd tried to erase me. I opened a new document, sketching ideas for a personal project, a series of prints inspired by resilience, each one a piece of my story. I'd sell them online, maybe at local markets, and use the money to fund a scholarship for kids like me, the ones no one saw. I glanced at Pop's house, the porch swing creaking under me. This was my foundation now, a place to build from. I didn't need my family's name to matter. I'd make my own mean something. My phone buzzed, a reply from the firm, already scheduling a call. My heart raced, but it wasn't fear this time, it was possibility. I thought of Tim's text, still unanswered, and decided I'd reach out soon, but on my terms. For now, I was done carrying their weight. I scratched Max's ears, his eyes half closed in contentment, and opened my sketch app. The first line I drew was sharp, unbroken, a new beginning. The sun dipped low, painting Pop's backyard in soft gold as I sat on the porch swing, Max's head heavy in my lap. My laptop was closed now, the pitch sent, the first steps of my new life taken. I traced the scratches on the swing's armrest, each mark a story from Pop's years here, and felt a quiet settle over me. The betrayal, Jesse's drugs, Mom's complicity, Dad's silence, still stung, but it wasn't the whole of me anymore. I'd spent so long trying to fit their mold, to be the daughter they'd see, but sitting here, with Max's steady breathing and Pop's jazz drifting through the open window, I realized my worth didn't need their approval. It never had. I thought back to the camera, that small choice to watch Max that became my salvation. It wasn't just proof of my innocence, it was proof of my instincts, my ability to protect what mattered. I'd been invisible to them, but I'd seen myself all along, in my sketches, my designs, the way I'd fought to keep Max safe. That fight had led me here, to a place where I could breathe, where I could build. Pop's words echoed. You've got your own fire. He was right. I wasn't just surviving their betrayal. I was thriving beyond it. Max shifted, his nose nudging my hand, and I smiled, scratching his ears. I didn't need a family that tore me down. I had Pop, who'd fought for me without hesitation, and Max, who'd never doubted me. I had my work, my clients, the community I was starting to build. My phone sat beside me, Tim's text still unanswered. I'd reply soon, maybe invite him to visit, but I wasn't rushing. My peace came from within now, from knowing I was enough. The sky darkened, stars peeking through, and I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. I wasn't running anymore. Not from them, not from myself. I was home, not in a place, but in who I was becoming. That was my victory, my legacy, and I'd carry it forward, one step at a time. So, what do you think? Did I rise above their betrayal enough, or should I have fought harder? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and if you've ever had to break free from someone holding you back, share your story. I'd love to hear it. This journey taught me that family isn't always blood. It's the people who see you, who lift you up. I found mine in Pop, Max, and the life I'm building. You can find yours too. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, and let's keep inspiring each other to claim our own worth.